You're listening to Stealing from Wizards, Volume 2, Burglary, by R.A. Consul. Chapter 8, A Brief History of Ignorance. The prohibition on discussing familiars in spellcraft meant that it was the only time or place where it wasn't the main topic of conversation. Everyone speculated endlessly on what each other's familiars would be, all with very reasoned and rational explanations of why that creature was the only possible thing that they could summon. By dinner on the first night, Kuro was already tired of hearing about it. He had other things to worry about anyway, the first of which was a missing Charlie. Meals were pretty much the only thing that Charlie would reliably show up to on time without being physically dragged there by Marie. But despite some of her favorite foods, pork nuggets and French fried beets, cooling on her plate, she was nowhere to be seen. It wasn't until barbecue coleslaw was being dished out that she burst into the dining hall. "Look what I found in the library!" she shouted as she presented an old leather-bound tome with the title, An Index of Familiars and Their Meanings. "It's great! It has pretty much every animal ever and what they mean and famous people that had them as familiars, and there's sort of a quiz thing at the back that tells you what your familiar will probably be. I've done it 3 times and so far I got a fox, a bear, and a parrot." "I thought Miss McCutcheon said familiars didn't mean anything and that you could not predict them," said Marie, eyeing the book skeptically. "Well, of course she's gonna say that," replied Charlie. "She's trying to make whoever gets a rat or a pigeon feel better. Not that it's super mind getting a pigeon though, they have really good senses of direction and I could send letters without using the lutin post, like secret messages that can't be tracked. Anyway, it doesn't matter if the book is true, it's fun." "Hey Meredith, what's your familiar?" Charlie shouted down the row of tables where Meredith towered over her neighbors. Meredith answered Charlie while chewing. "A trout," she said. Marie scrunched her nose at the answer. "Like the fish?" "Yeah," Meredith shrugged. "It's not very useful unless you drop something in a lake. Better than one of the other boys in my year. Merlin Wellington got a tarantula, and he's scared of spiders. He straight up fainted the first time he summoned it." Marie cringed. Charlie, having found the right page in the book, shared her discoveries. "A trout familiar means that you're a boon to your companions and have great strength of character. You enjoy simple pleasures but do not suffer from overindulgence. You share a familiar with Loki Vandelson and Narcissa of Dodona." Sounds about right," laughed Meredith. "Hey Marie, you should do the test to find out what you'll get." Marie had a brief battle between her skepticism and her curiosity, and eventually gave in. "All right, go on." "Right, first, is your index finger on your right hand longer or shorter than the ring finger on your left?" Charlie furiously tallied the results of Marie's answers about her eyelash length, birthday, favorite flavors, sleeping habits, and experiences with ducks, which left the others an opportunity to talk. "What do you guys hope to get?" asked Marie between questions. Arthur, who was poking a pork nugget around his plate with a fork and chewing on his lip, answered first. "I don't know if I can summon one," he said. "Familiars are a human thing. I'm not really a human, so it probably won't work for me." He put some effort into rallying a bit of optimism. "If I can, though, I would like to get a wolf, like my dad. But anything's fine, really." "And what about you, Kuro?" "Sorry, what?" Kuro was distracted from the conversation. There was something odd going on with the lutin, but he couldn't figure out what it was. They were walking up and down on the tables, distributing food and chatting with the students like normal, but something seemed off. "What do you want your familiar to be?" Kuro laughed that she bothered to ask. He had no delusions that he'd be able to cast the spell. It was long and complicated and in Gaelic. It was so hard that it wasn't even going to be graded. Kuro wasn't planning on even trying. He figured he could use the extra time to pass his other courses. He did have one fear about it. One that he hadn't yet realized, which chose that moment to voice itself. "Anything but a crow's okay with me," he said. Phineas's familiar had been a crow. Kuro felt that he'd much rather have a trout or a tarantula than anything that implied that his old master still had any influence over him. That thought passed quickly, though, and he returned to his previous distractions. He couldn't get the notion out of his head that there was something terribly wrong with the lodge staff. "Have you noticed anything strange about the lutin this year?" he asked once none was in earshot. The other three looked at Kuro uncomprehending, then at a couple of lutin chatting with the new students at a different table. They looked like they always did. Tiny people with oversized eyes, ears, and noses, with braided and beaded mustaches and beards. They wore the same droopy knitted caps and woven sashes as the year before. They walked on the table and served weird food just as they always did, and yet something seemed wrong. "Nope, totally normal," said Charlie before returning to the advanced arithmetic required to calculate Marie's familiar. "No stranger than usual, I think," said Marie. "I am never sure if they are strange because that is the way lutin are, or if they just pretend because they like to confuse wizards." "That's a good question," said Arthur. "Lutin are very secretive. I had never seen one before I came here. Maybe they're playing a big joke on us." Good question or not, it failed to help Kuro at all. It made him feel a bit like his mind was playing tricks on him. It would help if things would just slow down for a bit and let him think. But nobody seemed willing to give him the opportunity. "A garter snake!" Charlie shouted and flung her hands up in excitement, nearly knocking Kuro off his seat. "That isn't useful or cool," Marie groaned in disappointment. "It means you're not one to stand out, that you appreciate hard work as its own reward, and are slow to warm to people," Charlie continued. "Are you sure you did the math right?" "Dead sure. I checked twice. Do you want to know what famous wizards had them?" "Will I have heard of them?" Charlie checked the names. "Probably not." "Skip it then." Marie proceeded to sulk into her slaw. "Why are you bothered?" asked Arthur. "Like you said, you can't predict familiars. The book is probably wrong." "Of course it is wrong," Marie snapped. "But if it's going to be wrong, it could be nice enough to say I am clever and pretty and have a dragon that I can ride." Kuro continued to quietly puzzle over his concerns with the lutin for the next several days, while everyone else continued to obsess over their familiars. He made no more progress than they did, and was becoming more and more convinced that, like his classmates' familiars, it was all in his imagination. The lutin themselves were entirely unhelpful. When Kuro approached one of them with his questions, she looked shocked at being asked and walked away in a hurry. From then on, all the lutin treated him like he was a dangerous animal, one to be fed and pacified but not interacted with. Kuro wasn't sure this was a sign of their strange behavior or his. It wasn't till Friday afternoon in social studies, while his ears were listening to a lecture on the Winter War of Succession of 1835, and his hands were busy scribbling the notes that his eyes were reading off the board, that his mouth, having been left unsupervised, figured it out. "They were walking," he blurted out over the teacher. "Please raise your hand before speaking, Charlie," replied Mr. Widdershins automatically, turning away from the chalkboard. He found Charlie to be as surprised as he that it wasn't her who had spoken out of turn. Sorry, sir," said Kuro, and raised his hand, though he didn't have any questions related to the class. "I just realized, do you know anything about lutin?" Mr. Widdershins looked between Kuro and his board full of details of centuries-old bloodlines and blood feuds, torn between his obligation to the curriculum and a student showing interest in something. "No is a strong word," he said at last. "I've heard things, but a lot of that contradicts itself. The history of the lutin is a collection of lies and misunderstandings, and most of what's written down is misleading or, more often, simply not true." Suddenly, Mr. Widdershins found that he had the attention of the whole class. Startled and confused by a room full of interested pupils, he continued speaking. "There are a few things we're sure of. For one, the lutin have been delivering mail across the 3 kingdoms for a little over a century. Also, lutin of one form or another exist everywhere within the fairy realm, on every continent and pretty much every island. And of course, they can travel great distances almost instantly. After that, it's a lot of hearsay and guesswork, which the lutin themselves seem to enjoy adding misinformation to. It's said they can always tell if they're being watched, and that they can turn invisible, and that they all share a single mind. Rumor is they don't see the veil like we do. Where we see the veil at the edge of salt water, they just see the far shore. Also, they can go back to anywhere they've been before, just like that." He snapped his fingers to punctuate the point. "The common wisdom is that once a lutin gets into a place, They can bring their friends, and their friends can bring their friends, and so on. It becomes impossible to keep them out. Mr. Wittershins leaned back on his desk and thrust his hands into the pockets of his ill-fitting suit with a casual confidence, somehow more comfortable talking about the things that he didn't know than ones that he did. For most of our history, they were viewed as pests and treated that way. Wizards went to great lengths to keep them out of their homes and towns. Even many of the buildings here have salted bricks built into the foundations, largely to keep lutin and other fey creatures out. There were huge extermination efforts. Extermination? Shouted Ali Khaldun. Like, killing them? Oh, yes, the teacher nodded solemnly. But the thing is, it's not clear that any were actually killed. There are certainly reports of great massacres and sweeping victories over the lutin swarms, but not much in the way of evidence. There should be hundreds of bodies, thousands if some of the accounts are to be believed, but there are only a couple dozen lutin skeletons known anywhere. Some reports have whole teams of hunters spending months trying to catch just a single lutin and failing. The histories just don't tally. We don't even know how many lutin there are. There are somewhere between 200 and 50 million. It could just be the same handful of lutin popping up all over the world, or a thriving global civilization. We just don't know. 150 years ago, the lutin were really on the ropes. They'd been driven out of each of the 3 kingdoms and were being hunted relentlessly. They surrendered to the wizard forces and signed treaties limiting where they could live and where they could go and swearing fealty to the crowns. Here's the really interesting part, though. The same sort of thing happened all over the place. Lutin in Europe, Asia, Africa, everywhere, independently, came to agreements with their local wizards. The wizards didn't figure that out for decades. Most of the kingdoms around the world claimed it was a proud victory that no other kingdom could have accomplished. There's a growing school of thought that the whole thing was just an elaborate prank by the lutin, and that they were never in any danger at all. That's the sort of thing that makes history fun, finding the mysteries and the holes in the stories. Mr. Wittershins was grinning and pacing, waving his hands about as he spoke, but he caught sight of the chalkboard by accident and deflated. But we should get back to the lesson, he said as he reclaimed his chalk. But why? Whined Leif Ivarsson. It's so boring. Because the Winter King thinks it's important that students know the history of the royal family of Alfheim, said the teacher with little more enthusiasm than Leif. If you disagree, you're welcome to take it up with him. Also, it's what's going to be on the test next week. That marked the end of anything interesting happening in social studies, possibly forever. And Kuro was again left with his thoughts while Wittershins stuttered through an endless series of names, places, and dates. He'd been so interested in what was being said about the lutin that he'd almost lost hold of the realization that had started the whole thing. It took some considerable scavenging through discarded and abandoned thoughts to find his epiphany again. Once he did, he took the time to examine it more closely. The lutin had been walking. They walked up and down the table, delivering meals. They walked away from him when he asked them questions. These were entirely normal things to do for people, which is why it took Kuro so long to notice how strange it was for lutin. And 2 months away from the school had blurred his memory of how they normally behave. Lutin don't walk anywhere. They just popped between places. The previous year, it had been strange to see them walk the whole length of a table. They'd blink from one side of a person to the other just to avoid having to walk around them. Yet this year, Kuro hadn't seen a lutin appear or disappear once. He asked his friends about it after the bell rang and was startled by the response. Of course I've seen them disappear, said Arthur flatly. They do it all the time. You can barely look at them before they are gone again, agreed Marie. It's pretty much all they do, added Charlie. I wonder where they go. Sensing an impending bout of speculation from Charlie, Marie quickly returned the question to Kuro. Why do you ask? I don't think I've seen one do it all year, said Kuro. They've been walking places. No, they haven't, said Charlie. I've been right beside you at dinner every night and they pop all over the place. Not when I'm looking. Charlie went off like a firework in her excitement at that claim. Do you think they can really tell if people are looking at them? What's so weird about that? Asked Kuro. Can't everybody? This was greeted by stunned looks and silence from his friends. Marie nearly asked a question, but thought better of it, and dragged the others into an empty classroom, out of sight of other students, before whispering, Do you think you can do it because you are a demi-lutin? Is it something you were born with? Kuro considered the possibility. He'd been told that he was half-lutin by Ms. Crawley before she was arrested, but he'd never put too much thought into it. He was a failed experiment. Phineas had been very clear about that. Virtually nothing about Kuro worked the way it was supposed to. Kuro's creator and former master might be a cruel and evil man, but dishonesty was not one of his faults. And if he had been honest about anything, it was the disappointment he felt about Kuro. I don't think so, Kuro said at last. I don't think I was born with it. It's something I learned when I was picking pockets. I bet anyone could do it if they spent a few years trying not to get seen stealing things. The others looked skeptical. Still whispering, Marie continued her thought. Do you think maybe is why the lutin are acting strangely in front of you, though? I don't think so, said Kuro. They didn't act this way last year. But did they know last year? Marie gave Kuro a meaningful look that made him reconsider his position. He hadn't kept being a half-lutin a secret. The principal and a bunch of hounds had been there when he found out, too. Lots of people knew. Then again, hounds liked keeping secrets. Ms. McCutcheon probably wouldn't tell anyone, and all the people Kuro had told himself were in the room with him. Did you guys ever tell anyone? Arthur looked shocked at the suggestion. I would never tell anyone after you kept my being a changeling secret. It's way too good a secret to share, said Charlie. Marie shrugged. Who would I tell? The conversation was rudely interrupted by the sound of the bell, informing them that they were already late for alchemy. They rushed to class to find it in disarray. Nobody was in their seats. Students were all cramming to the front of the class, fighting for access to the chalkboard. Charlie very nearly had to tackle someone to figure out what was happening. Class project, explained Sean Cassidy, who was too timid to fight his way to the front of the throng. De rigueur wants us to collect ingredients ourselves. There's a sign-up sheet for who's getting what. Cool! Charlie clapped in delight. What are we making? Overhearing Charlie's questions, the professor shambled over to the tardy students. We will be enacting one of the foundational formulas of alchemy, he said. We shall together concoct the formula to transmute lead into gold. We are most fortunate that on this island nearly all of the required ingredients can be found. He wandered off to congratulate Evelyn Lemieux on her excellent choice of ingredients. She had held up the line, deciding between pixie dust and moondrop nectar. We are making real gold? Asked Marie in disbelief. Like, real gold? She repeated. Yeah, said Arthur casually. Isn't that really valuable? I guess. It's one of the most expensive building materials, I think. Building materials? Marie clutched her head in her hands. Oh, of course, great for roofs, Charlie joined in. It's heavy, but it lasts forever. They love it up in Alfheim. You've seen Wertheim up in the winter quarter, right? The whole roof is made of gold shields. Those are actually gold? Said Marie in a mix of astonishment and anger. Just one of those could make you rich in the Bland Lands. And you are using them as shingles? What is wrong with wizards? It's no good in the Bland Lands. You can't take it out through the veil, said Charlie, crushing Marie's brief hopes. She chewed on the inside of her cheek as she tried to remember what she'd heard on the subject. It's like inert or something. It can get in, but it can't get out. It's like the opposite of salt, which messes up the veil and magic just bounces off it. Gold absorbs magic really well, but just bounces off the veil. Marie groaned in disappointment. Her scheme for living a life of untold wealth was snatched from her in its infancy. Is that why the school is so fussy about us fireflies not bringing jewelry and electronics? It would get stuck on this side? She asked. Probably, replied Charlie. Being late to class had not been a good idea on this particular day. They were the last to reach the sign-up sheet, and the pickings were slim and unsavory. Luminous slime mold, night raven guano, moose fly larva, and bilious tree frog bile. None of them could quite decide which was the worst option or who should be stuck with the last choice, so they played rock, paper, scissors to decide who got what. Could be worse, said Kuro of his assigned task of collecting bird droppings, but nobody wanted to trade, so he wasn't sure. Thank you for listening to Stealing from Wizards. If you liked our show, please consider rating or reviewing on iTunes. If you want to support this podcast or just can't wait for the next chapter, the full book is available on Amazon, Kobo, and Indigo. Our theme music was written by Camille Saint-Saëns, transcribed by Franz Liszt, performed by Rebecca Verdun, and used with permission. This episode was produced by Jim Tigwell.